The snow wasn't falling, it was attacking. A solid wall of white fury flung sideways by a wind that screamed like a banshee across the endless Dakota plains. Out there, swallowed by the chaos, lay Alara, alone, betrayed, her body heavy with the child she fought to protect, her breath freezing in ragged plumes before the gale ripped it away. Just hours ago, the lights of Redemption Creek had promised refuge instead. They'd offered only judgment, spitting her out into the frozen maw of the storm. Jedediah Stone, the father of her child. Preacher Thorne, the town's righteous voice. They'd looked upon her agony and turned their backs, condemning her to die. The cold bit deep, leaching warmth, leaching hope, but unseen, unheard through the blizzard's roar. Destiny was riding hard. Not the death she awaited in the deepening drifts, but salvation, wearing the face of a Lakota Sioux chief, a man named Maddo, who would see past the hatred poisoning the land and claim this pregnant outcast, this frozen soul, as one of his own. Her story wasn't just about surviving the cold, it was about surviving cruelty, and finding a fire of belonging in the heart of a people she'd been taught were enemies. Redemption Creek. It had sounded like a haven when Alara first heard the name, whispered by a weary stagecoach driver weeks earlier. A place to disappear, perhaps, to quietly await the birth of her child far from the condemning eyes of her past. She'd stepped off that stagecoach clutching a small valise and a hope fragile as spun glass. The town itself was little more than a raw scar on the prairie, a single muddy street flanked by false-fronted buildings, a saloon already noisy by mid-morning, and a stark white church spire piercing the vast, indifferent sky. She carried herself with a deliberate quietness, her gaze often downcast, hoping to melt into the background. But anonymity was a rare commodity on the frontier, especially for a woman alone, her condition soon becoming impossible to hide beneath her simple, worn dress. The whispers started subtly. Curious glances from the women gathered outside the mercantile, their conversations pausing as she passed. Appraising looks from men lounging on the boardwalk, some pitying, some predatory. Alara felt the weight of their scrutiny like a physical burden. She found a small, cheap room at the back of the Widow Gable's boarding house, paying up front with the last of her savings. She tried to find work, mending, cleaning, anything, but doors remained politely, firmly closed. "Nothing today," became the constant refrain. The heart of the town's judgment beat within the chest of Preacher Thorne, a tall, austere man with eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. His Sunday sermons were legendary, filled with thunderous condemnations of sin, his gaze sweeping the congregation, seeming to linger just a moment too long on Alara when she dared attend. He spoke of moral purity, of shielding the community from corrupting influences, his words painting lone women, especially those in Alara's circumstances, as dangerous temptations. And Thorne found a receptive ear and a powerful ally in Jedediah Stone. Stone owned the sprawling cattle ranch that was the lifeblood and the chokehold of Redemption Creek. He was a man accustomed to getting his way, his wealth insulating him from consequence. Alara knew him, knew the charm he could turn on like a lantern, the promises whispered under a summer moon that felt impossibly distant now. He'd courted her briefly when she'd first arrived, before her secret became visible. Then came the chilling distance, the outright denial when the truth could no longer be concealed. He was a man terrified of scandal, protective of his standing, a standing Thorne eagerly helped him uphold. Stone's denial was absolute, public. He painted Alara as a liar, a desperate woman trying to trap a respectable man. And in Redemption Creek, Jedediah Stone's word carried the weight of gold. Widow Gable, likely pressured, regretfully informed Alara she needed the room back. Suddenly, Alara was not just shunned, but homeless as winter began to breathe its first icy warnings across the plains. She felt the net tightening, woven by hypocrisy and fear, and knew her fragile hope for a quiet life in Redemption Creek was already dead. Finding shelter became her immediate, desperate focus. The only place she could afford, the only place no one seemed to care about, was an abandoned prospector's lean-to on the far edge of Stone's vast property, technically beyond the town limits. It was little more than 3 crumbling walls of rough timber and sod leaning against a rocky outcrop, the fourth side open to the biting wind. It offered scant protection, but it was hers. She worked tirelessly, patching the gaps with mud and scavenged branches, her hands growing raw in the cold air. Jedediah Stone didn't like loose ends. He didn't like Illara being anywhere near Redemption Creek, a living reminder of his lie. He decided it was time for a more direct approach. He rode out one windswept afternoon, finding her gathering brittle firewood near the pathetic lean-to. 2 of his ranch hands flanked him, their expressions mirroring his own cold dismissal. He reined in his horse, looking down at her. The wind whipped strands of hair across her face, but she met his gaze steadily. "Illara," he said, his voice flat. "This needs to end." She straightened, clutching the bundle of sticks. "What needs to end, Jedediah?" "Your presence here. It's inconvenient." He avoided her eyes, looking out over the bleak landscape. "Thorn agrees. The town agrees. You're a disruption." He reached into his coat, pulling out the same worn leather pouch he'd offered before, though perhaps with slightly more coins this time. "I'm being generous. Take this. Enough to get you far away. California, maybe. Oregon. Doesn't matter. Just go." He tossed the pouch down near her worn boots. It landed with a soft thud in the dust. Illara looked at the pouch, then back at his face. Something flickered in her eyes, not fear, but a weariness mixed with contempt. "My child will be born soon, Jedediah. Here. This is the only home I have." His jaw tightened. "That brat ain't mine. And this shack ain't a home. It's an eyesore on my land." He nodded to his men. "You've got until the first heavy snow. If you're still here when the plains turn white, well, winter can be harsh. Accidents happen." One of the hands smirked, spitting tobacco juice near her feet. "Best listen to the boss, ma'am. This ain't healthy country for strays." Illara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. This wasn't just a dismissal. It was a threat, cold and clear. She bent down, not to pick up the pouch, but to gather a few more sticks. Her movements were deliberate, controlled. "I have nothing left to lose, Jedediah," she said quietly, without looking up. "Threats don't frighten me anymore." Stone stared at her for a long moment, perhaps surprised by the lack of pleading, the absence of tears. He saw only a quiet resolve he couldn't break. With a curse under his breath, he wheeled his horse around. "Don't say you weren't warned," he threw back over his shoulder as he and his men rode away, leaving Illara alone with the wind, the dust, and the chilling promise of the coming snow. She watched them go, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She knew then that survival wasn't just about enduring the elements. It was about enduring the calculated cruelty of men like Stone and Thorn. And the first snowflakes were already beginning to dance in the air. The days shortened, grew colder. The sky turned a permanent, bruised gray. Illara husbanded her meager resources, the dried roots she gathered, the occasional rabbit caught in one of her surprisingly effective snares. Memories surfaced unbidden, tracking skills learned from a father she barely remembered. Knowledge of edible plants gleaned from a life lived closer to the wild edge than anyone in Redemption Creek could imagine. These dormant instincts sharpened now, honed by necessity. She observed everything. The way Jedediah's men sometimes rode the perimeter of the property, their eyes lingering on her lean-to. The shifting alliances in town, who avoided her gaze entirely, who offered a flicker of pity quickly extinguished. She saw the fear behind the judgment in some eyes, the fear of crossing Jedediah Stone. Her quietness became a shield, but also a listening post. She moved like a shadow, conserving energy, her mind constantly calculating. Where was the nearest water source if the creek froze solid? Which way would the worst winds blow? How long could her firewood last? This wasn't passive waiting, it was active survival. A silent battle waged against indifference and malice. Preacher Thorne's sermons grew harsher, using Alara's plight as a parable of divine retribution, warning his flock against offering any aid, lest they invite similar judgment upon themselves. He painted her not just as a sinner, but as a contamination. The town drew its skirts tighter around itself. The mercantile owner now barred his door when he saw her approach. Children, emboldened by their parents' whispers, sometimes threw pebbles towards her lean-to. Their taunts carried on the wind. Each incident was a small cut, bleeding away her hope. Yet, each act of cruelty also forged something harder within her. A steely resolve to endure, if not for herself, then for the life stirring insistently within her. Then the blizzard struck, not gradually, but with sudden, overwhelming force. The world vanished behind a curtain of driving snow. The wind screamed, shaking the flimsy walls of her shelter. Drifts piled high against the rocks, threatening to bury her small refuge completely. Inside, huddled beneath a threadbare blanket, Alara felt the first, undeniable tightening deep in her womb. Labor. It was beginning. Too early. In the worst possible conditions. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her resolve. A violent ripping sound tore through the howl of the storm. Wood splintered. She peered through a crack, her heart pounding. Two figures, indistinct shapes bundled against the blizzard, were systematically tearing apart her shelter. Jedediah's men. They worked with brutal efficiency, kicking down the patched walls, pulling away the branches she'd so painstakingly gathered. Snow poured into the lean-to, instantly extinguishing the tiny fire she'd managed to keep alive. They didn't speak, just destroyed, their actions fueled by cold orders. Then, as quickly as they appeared, they vanished back into the white chaos. She was exposed. The wind cut like knives through her thin clothes. The contractions intensified, stealing her breath, doubling her over. Panic clawed at her throat. Staying meant freezing. Staying meant dying. A desperate, perhaps foolish, idea sparked. Redemption Creek. Maybe seeing her like this, actively in labor, dying the storm they condemned her to, maybe someone, anyone, would show mercy. Clinging to that fragile hope, she pushed herself up, staggering out into the teeth of the blizzard, fighting her way back towards the town that had cast her out. Each step was an odyssey of pain and dwindling strength. The lights of the town seemed impossibly far, mocking her desperation. She finally reached the edge of town, collapsing against the wall of the livery stable, gasping, snow plastering her face and clothes. Figures emerged from the swirling white. Jedediah Stone, his face impassive under the brim of his hat, and beside him, Preacher Thorne, his expression one of grim satisfaction. Hope surged, desperate and illogical. They saw her. They had to help. Please, Alara choked out, the word torn away by the wind. Help the baby coming now. Stone just stared, his eyes like chips of ice. Thorne stepped forward, his voice cutting through the gale, laced with chilling certainty. The path of the wicked leads to desolation, he declared, his gaze sweeping over a shivering form. The storm is the Lord's judgment made manifest. Turn back, sinner. There is no sanctuary for you here. One of Stone's men, lurking nearby, stepped forward and kicked snow directly at her face. Get out of here. Ain't welcome. Go die in the drifts where you belong. The last vestiges of Alara's hope shattered. There was no mercy here. Only cold, hard condemnation. They were literally turning her away to die. Fear, sharp and primal, gave her a final burst of energy. She scrambled to her feet, turning her back on the harsh lights and false promises of Redemption Creek, and stumbled blindly out onto the open plains, into the heart of the raging storm. The blizzard swallowed her whole. She walked, fell, crawled, driven by an instinct she didn't understand. Pain became a constant roar, blurring with the wind. Contractions ripped through her, pulling her down. Finally, utterly spent, she collapsed into a deep snowdrift. The cold seeped in, numbing the pain, bringing a strange, quiet peace. This is the end, she thought, curling protectively around her belly. Forgive me, little one. She closed her eyes against the swirling white, unaware that shapes were moving through the storm, drawn by forces greater than hatred or judgment. Miles away, battling the same blizzard, Chief Matto led his Lakota hunting party homeward. They moved with the practiced ease of men born to this harsh land, buffalo robes pulled tight against the wind, ponies picking their way through the blinding snow. They carried precious buffalo meat, a boon for their winter camp hidden in a sheltered river valley. It was Chayton Falcon, whose sharp eyes first caught the dark anomaly against the white expanse. A fallen log. An animal. As they drew nearer, the shape resolved into something shocking. A Wasatch woman, half buried, unmoving. The warriors stopped, murmuring uneasily. Finding a white person out here, especially in this state, was rare and usually signaled trouble. Old wounds, broken treaties, the constant encroachment of settlers' suspicion was a necessary shield. "Leave her, Matto," urged Tasunka, an older warrior whose face bore the map of many hard winters. "Her people likely put her here. It is not our fight. The storm will finish it." Matto silenced him with a raised hand. He dismounted, his moccasins sinking deep as he approached the drift. He knelt, brushing snow from Alara's face. Her skin felt like ice, lips tinged blue, her breathing a mere flutter, but alive. Then his eyes fell on the unmistakable swell beneath her frozen shawl. Pte Win Yen, buffalo woman, he thought, using the Lakota term for a pregnant woman. Cast out, abandoned, heavy with child, in a killer storm. A flicker of profound empathy crossed Matto's stoic features. He saw past the pale skin, past the history of conflict between their peoples. He saw a mother fighting for her unborn child. He saw the ultimate vulnerability, betrayed by those who should have protected her. Lakota tradition held deep reverence for life, especially the miracle of birth. To leave her here would violate the core of his beliefs, the honor of his people. It would be yielding to the same cruelty that put her here. He looked at his warriors, his gaze clear, his decision firm. "Wakang Thanka watches," he said, invoking the Great Spirit. "Life is sacred. We do not leave her to the wind." He ignored the doubtful glances, gently scooping Alara into his arms. She felt terrifyingly light. He wrapped his own thick robe around her shivering form, a cocoon of warmth against the deadly cold. He saw her eyelids flutter weakly. A sign. "She carries life," Matto stated, his voice quiet but absolute. "Her spirit is strong. We take her to our camp." He carefully lifted her onto his own pony, mounting behind her, holding her securely against his chest. "Chapawee will know what to do." The warriors exchanged glances, but none argued. Matto's wisdom and honor were unquestioned. He was their chief. His compassion, even for a Wasatch outcast, stemmed from Lakota strength, not weakness. As the party turned towards the hidden valley, Matto felt the weight of his choice. He was bringing the conflict of the outside world into their sanctuary, but he was also upholding the deepest values of his people. He looked down at the pale, unconscious face nestled against his robe. He didn't know her name or her story, only that the storm had delivered her to his care. He had, in that moment, claimed her survival as his responsibility. And beneath the howling fury of the blizzard, a fragile connection was forged, a promise of sanctuary offered against the biting winds of hatred. The Lakota winter camp, nestled in a protected bend of the frozen river, was a haven of smoky warmth and community. Teepees stood like silent sentinels against the snow, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat. The arrival of Matto's party, especially with the chief carrying an unconscious white woman, brought the usual bustle to a halt. Faces peered from teepee flaps, curious, wary. Matto carried Alara directly to the largest teepee, the dwelling of Chapawee, the tribe's revered medicine woman. Chapawee, her face a network of wise wrinkles, examined Alara with swift, knowing hands. She clicked her tongue at the sight of Alara's frostbitten fingers and toes, murmuring Lakota healing chants as she applied poultices of herbs and bear grease. Other women arrived silently, bringing warm broth, thick furs, offering gentle assistance. Ilara drifted in a haze of pain, cold, and exhaustion, vaguely sensing the soft voices, the unfamiliar language spoken with kindness, the feeling of being cared for, truly cared for the first time in so long. Under Chapowee's ministrations, Ilara slowly thawed, the immediate threat of freezing receding. But the ordeal had triggered full labor. The Lakota women rallied around her, their movements calm and assured, their presence a quiet source of strength. Gone was the terror of being alone in the storm, replaced by the supportive energy of experienced hands and encouraging murmurs. They held her, wiped her brow, offered sips of willow bark tea, guiding her through the waves of pain with a gentle competence that felt profoundly safe. Several days after her rescue, shielded from the lingering storm within the warm embrace of the teepee, Ilara gave birth. A small cry pierced the quiet anticipation a son. Healthy, strong-voiced, perfect. Holding him close, wrapped in soft furs, Ilara wept, tears of pain melting into tears of overwhelming relief and gratitude. This tiny life, condemned by the world she'd fled, was welcomed here with reverence. Matto came to see the child later that day. He stood observing the mother and son, a rare softness touching his usually stoic face. He presented Ilara with a small buckskin pouch, beautifully adorned with intricate quillwork. "A gift," he said, his English careful but clear, "for the little warrior. May he grow strong like the bear." He then spoke to Chapawee and Lakota. The medicine woman nodded, then turned to Ilara. "Matto says you survived the Iatang Waiapeda fate, the great north wind. You have shown strength. You will be called Winyan Tawakoni, woman who lives." Chapawee smiled gently. "And the boy?" "Matto suggests Chayton, after the one with eyes like a falcon, who saw you first in the snow." Ilara nodded, tears welling again. "Winyan Tawakoni, woman who lives." It felt right. And Chayton, a strong name, a name tied to her rescue. Life began anew in the Lakota camp. Healing was slow, not just from the physical ordeal, but from the deeper wounds of betrayal. But the constant, quiet support of the Lakota women was a balm. They taught her words, shared tasks, showed her how to scrape hides, mend teepees, find edible berries even under the snow. She learned the rhythm of their lives, the deep respect they held for the land, for each other, for the spirit world. Her quiet nature, once a defense mechanism, now allowed her to listen, to learn, to gradually earn trust. Little Chayton thrived, passed from loving arms to loving arms, bundled warmly, sung Lakota lullabies. Ilara watched Matto lead his people, his fairness, wisdom, and quiet strength a constant reassurance. He kept a respectful distance, but she felt his protective gaze, knew he ensured her acceptance. She was no longer an outcast. She was Winyan Tawakoni, part of the Tiaspe, the extended family. But the plains have long ears. Eventually, a French trapper, trading near the Lakota winter grounds, heard the story. A white woman, saved from the blizzard, living among the Sioux with her newborn son. The description was unmistakable. When the trapper passed through Redemption Creek weeks later, seeking supplies, the tale inevitably reached Jedediah Stone. Ice formed in Stone's gut. She was alive, and she had the child, his child, living among the Sioux. Fury warred with a cold dread, the fury of being defied, of his plan failing, the dread of exposure, of this living proof of his lie potentially returning, of the scandal he'd tried so hard to bury. Preacher Thorne, hearing the news, saw it not as a miracle of survival, but as an affront. "An abomination," he thundered privately to Stone. "A fallen woman consorting with heathens. She bears your issue, Jedediah. It reflects on us all, on the sanctity of this community. You must retrieve them, bring them back to face proper Christian judgment and control." Thorne's piety conveniently masked Stone's panic. Goaded by Thorne and his own festering fear and pride, Jedediah made a decision born of arrogance. He wouldn't let this stand. He gathered a dozen of his most loyal and most rough-handed ranch hands. He armed them well, rifles, pistols. Thorn insisted on accompanying them, carrying his heavy Bible like a shield, his face set in lines of grim determination. They rode out from Redemption Creek, a posse fueled by self-interest and warped righteousness, heading straight for the Lakota winter camp. Jedediah carried gold, still clinging to the absurd belief that everything, even a mother and child sheltered by honor, had a price. He fundamentally misunderstood the people he was about to confront, and the transformation of the woman they now called their own. Their arrival was met not with fear, but with watchful silence. As Stone's posse rode into the clearing before the main camp, Lakota warriors melted out from the trees and teepees, not aggressively, but purposefully. Bows were casually held, hands rested near knives. There were far more warriors than Stone had anticipated. Children and women faded back towards the lodges. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Matto emerged, flanked by Tasunka and Chayton the warrior. He stood unarmed, his posture radiating calm authority that dwarfed Stone's bluster. Jedediah swung down from his horse, trying to project command, Thorn close behind him, clutching his Bible. The ranch hands dismounted uncertainly, eyes darting towards the silent, observing warriors. "Chief Matto," Stone began, his voice louder than necessary. "We're here for the white woman, Ilara, and the boy she had." Matto's gaze was level, unwavering. "Her name is Winyen Tawakoni. She and her son, Chayton, are Lakota now. They are under our protection." Thorn stepped forward, indignation puffing his chest. "This is unnatural. She is a Christian woman who has fallen into sin. She belongs with her own kind, under God's authority. Not here among." He waved a dismissive hand. Matto's eyes narrowed slightly. "Her own kind left her to die in a blizzard while she was in labor," he stated, his voice quiet but carrying across the clearing, each word a hammer blow. "Is that your God's authority? Is that Christian kindness?" Murmurs rippled through the watching Lakota. Shame flickered across the faces of a few townsfolk who had cautiously followed Stone's party from a distance, curious about the outcome. Stone flushed, shifting his weight. That's not the whole story. There were reasons, misunderstandings." He pulled out his pouch of gold, holding it out as if it were a magic talisman. "Look, Chief, let's be reasonable. She caused trouble, but she's white. The boy, well, take this gold. Generous payment for your troubles. Just give them back to us. We'll handle things." Matto looked at the gold with utter contempt, then back into Stone's eyes. "You think honor can be bought? You think a child's life has a price?" He paused, letting the silence press in. "You are the father, Ska, white man. Deny it again." Jedediah stammered, trapped. No, it's complicated." "It is simple," Matto countered. "You cast out your own blood. You left the mother to die. Now you come with guns and money to steal them back." He gestured towards the camp behind him. "Here, Winyen Tawakoni found Tiaspe family. Here, her son is welcomed as a gift, not a burden. She has found honor here, something you seem to know little about." At that moment, Ilara stepped out from Chapawee's teepee. The transformation was striking. She wore practical, well-kept buckskin, her hair neatly braided in the Lakota style. She looked healthy, strong, her eyes holding none of the fear Stone remembered, only a calm, clear strength. Little Chayton was securely held in a cradleboard on her back, peeking out curiously. Several Lakota women stood quietly beside her, a silent phalanx of support. She walked forward slowly, stopping near Matto, and looked directly at Jedediah Stone. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and clear, carrying easily in the tense silence. "Jedediah, Preacher Thorn, I am Winyen Tawakoni. This is my home now." She gestured to the people around her, to the land. "My son, Chayton, is Lakota. We belong here. We are not yours to take." Stone gaped, momentarily stunned by her transformation, by her absolute refusal. Thorn started sputtering about blasphemy and legal rights, but his words sounded pathetic against the backdrop of Lakota resolve and Alara's quiet dignity. Stone's men shifted nervously, acutely aware of the dozens of grim-faced warriors watching their every move, aware of how badly this could end for them. They weren't feared here. They were intruders. Maddow stepped forward slightly, his gaze sweeping over Stone and his men. "You have heard her. You have your answer. Leave this valley now, and do not ever return." His voice held the weight of finality. There was no room for negotiation. The story of Jedediah Stone's failed expedition and public humiliation spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. His power, once absolute, was diminished. Men still worked his ranch, still relied on his wages, but the fear was now tinged with contempt. They'd seen him bested, his bluff called, his cowardice laid bare not by guns, but by quiet honor and a woman's resilience. Preacher Thorn found his congregation smaller, his pronouncements on morality met with more skepticism. The rigid certainty of the town had been shaken. People started questioning if judgment was truly more righteous than compassion. Redemption Creek didn't transform overnight, but the cracks in its facade remained. Jedediah looked at Maddow's unyielding face, at Alara's resolute stance, at the silent threat posed by the surrounding warriors. He saw the faces of the townsfolk watching from the distance, witnessing his utter failure. Humiliation burned hotter than his fear. Without another word, he turned, yanked himself onto his horse, and spurred it savagely back the way he came. Thorn, red-faced and sputtering, scrambled after him. The ranch hands mounted quickly, almost tripping over each other in their haste to escape the heavy silence and the piercing stares. They retreated from the Lakota Valley not as enforcers, but as chastened fools, their authority revealed as hollow, their cruelty exposed. As their figures dwindled in the distance, a collective sigh seemed to rise from the Lakota camp. No violence, yet a profound victory had been won. Alara watched them go, the last ties to her painful past dissolving like smoke on the wind. She met Maddow's eyes across the clearing. A deep, silent understanding passed between them, respect earned, sanctuary given, a bond stronger than blood, forged in the heart of the storm. Far from the judgment and hypocrisy, Winyentawakoni embraced her new life. She learned the rhythms of the seasons, the language of the Lakota, the stories and songs that held their history and wisdom. She became skilled with a needle, her quillwork intricate, her hide tanning thorough. She found purpose not just in raising Chayton, but in contributing to the community that had saved her. Chayton grew tall and strong, his first words a mix of Lakota and English, equally comfortable chasing butterflies with Lakota children or listening to the elders' tales by the fire. He knew Maddow as a respected leader, Chapawee as a grandmother figure, the warriors as uncles. He knew the story of his birth, of his mother's survival, told not as a tale of shame, but of strength and the unexpected gift of belonging. Alara never forgot the cruelty of Redemption Creek, the sting of betrayal, the killing cold of the blizzard. But those memories no longer held power over her. They were part of the journey that led her here, to this life, to this family, woven into the fabric of Winyentawakoni, the woman who lives. Her peace was hard won, her home found not in a place marked on a map, but in the heart of a people who valued courage over conformity, compassion over condemnation. Under the vast, open sky of the northern plains, surrounded by the fierce, protective honor of the Lakota, the outcast had finally found her true sanctuary.